Hello and welcome to Wonkette's not quite live chat. I am Robin Panacchia, and this is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson. How you doing today,
Hi,
Stephen?
Robin. I am well, thank you. And jumping into things, we had some great news in Ohio this week where voters smacked down a Republican-driven constitutional amendment that made it more difficult to make any sort of changes from voters. Clearly, an intent to prevent a wave of um, I would call it sort of post-Dobbs fury of voters making it known that they sort of enjoy their bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
Um, it was sort of issue one, which went
Yes.
down in flames, would have increased the percentage needed for approval of any voter-backed constitutional amendment from 50% plus one to 60%, remove the grace period to collect signatures, and require that a daunting number of signatures be collected from all 88 Ohio counties to get any issue on the ballot. So this is essentially a clear sense of anti-democracy, what we've expected from Republicans, but pretty much consistent with how voters have reacted in
Mhm.
some would say surprising places post Dobbs. So what are your thoughts on that, Robin?
Well, they definitely tried to frame it a little bit like, no, 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 no. This has nothing to do with abortion. This is about preventing special interests from people who want abortions from coming into Ohio and taking over, our constitution in some capacity. And they veered between that and, oh no, it is actually totally about abortion. So they didn't really have consistent messaging on that.
Yeah,
Um,
they had like a lot of
voters
scary
didn't
ones,
quite
right?
see through it crazily enough. Um, and it was very clear that, oh, yes, we just happened to come up with this right after they started passing the abortion bills and right after that got on the ballot for November. Um, and, I find it very, very satisfying indeed. Ohio is the next Kansas, and soon they're going to end up having abortion in their constitution, whether Mike DeWine and his Republican friends like it or not. Mike DeWine's reaction to it was very entertaining, I thought personally.
Well, they did everything they could.
Yeah,
This holding it in August, so during the summer, which cost them tons of money to do,
yeah,
but specifically to hope for low turnout. But that didn't happen. It was a tremendously high turnout because voters are so pissed, and there's sort of organization to get voters out. They, I think, randomly were closing some polling places. They were doing everything they could,
oh
and they
yeah.
still failed in their sort of evil agenda. Um, and I guess so. A couple things are interesting to me. The one was a slight digression, but I think is important is that um, what we saw from Ohio voters here is that they don't believe that some ridiculous 60% threshold is what ensures democracy. They view that as actually tyranny of minority is not a good thing.
Yeah, no,
So
not so much.
so after Dobbs, and there was a period where Democrats had the Senate, the House, and the White House, and even after half the country had suddenly, thanks to Samuel Alito's Supreme Court, suddenly lost their bodily autonomy, Democrats are helpless to do anything because of Manchin and Sinema. And granted, Manchin has never been affirmatively supportive of abortion rights,
No, he has
but
not.
Sinema apparently claims to have been. But oh no, oh, if we got rid of the filibuster, that's the end of the world. We can't do that. And so an opportunity was lost to codify Roe at the national level. And what we've seen is that, well, no, voters don't want this. They don't want you to make it harder for them to
Mhm.
affect change or protect their own rights. And Republicans, and the argument has always been from Manchin and Sinema, specifically Sinema, is that, oh, well, if you have by simple majority rule, here's all the evil things, the bad things Republicans can do. So maybe it's better if no one can do anything. Except Republicans will always find ways to cheat. And they know that they don't have the votes. Most of the stuff that, and you've said this before, that argument Sinema made of sort of mutually assured destruction of bad policies or whatever
Mhm.
only works if you believe that what Democrats support is fundamentally bad. So it's like, oh, well, we could pass a healthcare for all with 50% plus one, but then Republicans will come in and pass a kill your dog bill at 50. I was like, well, their proposals aren't popular and are very hard to pass, even at the state level. These are just because they have gerrymandered themselves into power. I think in Ohio, it was
Oh,
something
yeah.
where it was like they only win
Ohio is
53%,
ridiculous. Yeah.
but they get 70% of the seats and everything. So what we
Whenever
believe is
anything comes
popular.
down to whenever things come down to a simple majority of like votes on a particular issue, the liberal side wins. Almost no matter like any poll you see, you will like when do you ever see a poll with people like largely favoring the Republican side on any issue? You don't. Um they even, half the time the majority of people end up siding with the wacky radicals like me, and not just like the middle of the road Democrats who are like good and normal and not scaring anyone. Like, I mean, like even with things involving like incarceration and like other things that you would think, oh, people would definitely want to just like arrest everyone, right? Or, decriminalization of drug use, of prostitution, all this other stuff. Most people have, like, when it comes down to it on individual issues, especially abortion, when they're alone in the voting booth by themselves, knowing that it could be them or their kid, um, end up siding with the whatever side the left is on. Gun control. The majority of
Mhm.
Americans want gun control. Like there really isn't the majority of Americans want, universal health care, which, is almost as annoying to Democrats as it is to Republicans. Um,
Well, yeah, and to that point, I mean, I think there's been this fear from Democrats. I mean, specifically when the Rust Belt fell, and
mhm.
they're still like losing um, non-college educated white people, and the response is either they're hopelessly racist, which is I tend to not want to believe, or at least don't think is constructive, because I'm kind of going to be black forever. So if there's like, okay, well, I guess that's it. That those states are gone because I can't change this situation. But if there's an actual issue why people who, let's say, voted
Yeah.
for Obama twice didn't vote for Hillary Clinton or Biden, and we could try to figure out what that is. Um, but I think the answer, the fear that we've seen, I think from Democrats have been, especially candidates, those areas, is that, oh, to win in these areas, they actually don't like abortion. So I need to be the Democrat
Yeah.
who is, okay, well, maybe those ladies don't get too much bodily autonomy. Or, I look at me, I'm shooting my gun in an ad, and look at me, I want to execute. I'll even show up and see them execute someone. I love it so much. I'm a different type of Democrat. And what the issue though is that, well, no, it was never that you weren't Republican enough. Perhaps these issues people were in your corner with all along. The
Yeah.
problem is that you are not effectively conveying. I think it's a branding issue, frankly.
I would absolutely agree with that as well. Um,
You're not conveying someone who's in the corner for me. You're just saying some prepackaged platitudes. I don't trust that you're someone. If you listen to Trump voters instead of dismissing them all as racist, and look, I'm black, least likely the person to want to like give sympathy for the devil of these people. But if you're going to dismiss half the country, we're effed because they're most of them. So but if you listen to a lot of these folks, they believe wrongly that he's in their corner. He's one of them. He doesn't look down at them. He's going to help them. And I think it is a branding thing of where, no, the issue is that you have stopped these people just don't believe that you're going to be in their corner for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, I hate to put it this way because it sounds very, very shallow. But I was thinking this week in regards to, there was the whole thing where Elon Musk followed that guy who was just outed as a former white supremacist immediately after he was outed as a former white supremacist who just, sometimes thinks like, maybe it should be a white ethno state, but just like casually, like not like in like a real way. Um, and everyone was sort of sharing the like, no one under like, what are Elon Musk's politics? It's not totally clear. And then, various things
Mhm.
that show his like like yes, it was the New York Times article about him. It was like, it's not totally for sure what his politics are, even though it very much is. But at the same time, I think that Elon Musk votes for whoever is complimenting him.
Mhm.
Like, I think that he has such an ego that, like, his politics are heavily I was just thinking, like, I think his politics are very heavily influenced by, like, who he thinks he's getting complimented by. I think when he was, like, doing more, like, environmentally friendly cars or whatever, like the Teslas and everything, he was like, oh, I'm maybe more liberal about things because he was getting credit for that from the left. I assume I didn't really know who he was at that point. I don't think, um, but I think a lot of people are like that, and I've said this before. A lot of you know the draw that people have to the Republican Party is less issue based and more compliment based and more about like they're being told you're wonderful, you don't need to change, you're just perfect the way you are, be a horrible person and we'll support you. And that's a lot easier than the Democrats kind of have like an everyone is flawed and maybe we all have things to work on, which is a lot more realistic. But people like compliments. I
No,
like
I mean,
compliments are my favorite. But like I don't necessarily need a political party to give them to me.
well, it's sort of in a way, it's kind of working in art. So someone will look at, oh, this movie did well. So like, let's say Barbie, it did well.
Yeah.
They won't look at the emotional reason, that what there was the emotional connection between this
Yeah.
movie and the fans and audiences. They will say, well, it was because of something either superficial.
Because it's a childhood
This person
toy.
cast,
Lena Dunham is making Polly Pocket the movie, like for
yeah,
real.
and that so it's
Maybe
just a very
that's why it
superficial
was
glance.
successful. Like,
And that's not the reason. They'll look at, oh, you dotted this T, oh, the
yeah.
Obama was successful because, oh, we'll just get someone who's also young. And they try that with Marco Rubio to much limited success. And yeah, I think it's a connection between voters and the person. Tim Ryan in Ohio tried, but again, he was coming again from the idea of I'm not like other Democrats, except well, you're part of that club. If you're trying to
And
be
people
like,
hate that. This is the thing. That is an automatic turnoff to basically everyone. It's why there's a joke about girls saying, "Oh, I'm not like other girls." Like no one likes that because then you're also like putting it's if you come out by saying like I'm not like other Democrats, then people like their mind immediately like that's just basic psychology. Their mind immediately goes to, well, then I guess other Democrats are bad. Um,
and why
it's
would I
it's
help you give them power? Why aren't you stopping
yeah,
them? And you also, why do I trust you? And that's Kristen Sinema's thing. People talk about that. I mean, she's awful. And I didn't have time to collect a clip for this. But this one where she's ranting about how livid she is with this administration for its immigration policies and apparently giving money to those awful people in New York, which isn't a border state, although it actually does border. But we get what she's trying to say there.
it was
But
near the border.
she's
Right?
showing she's showing so much anger and rage over this issue, which won't actually help her with Republicans who have issues with immigration policy. What it actually reinforces, though, amongst people who would think would be voting for her. It's like, wait a minute, I've never seen this degree of passion or anger. You haven't said I'm livid with the Supreme Court for taking abortion rights. She instead had a very measured statement. And so she doesn't seem to get how to communicate on these issues because she's not fully human. And who seems more human is Carrie Lake, who is it's terrible, but she's like, everyone in this room, we're in it together,
Hmm.
and
And
we are
that's what
all
people
part of a
want to
team.
hear.
Yes. So she comes off as more of like, I'm one of you and I'm fighting on your behalf, as opposed to cinema never comes across as I'm one of you. It's like, I'm your better and I'm going to get things done for you, but I'm your
Yeah.
better. And that's been a form of, that's been dismissed for years. No one has time for that. No one's interested in that type of
No
policy
one
anymore.
likes just so you know, I'm better than you, unless they're like, clearly being funny about it, which I don't think, weirdly, there are some people who can pull that off. Most people cannot. Kristen cinema cannot. Um, but here's the thing. You've got Democrats love self-deprecation, and they love sort of pretending like, oh, our policies are like vegetables. We have to hide them in mashed potatoes in order to get people to like and eat them. And they act this way regardless of how popular policies are. They, do the we have to do incrementalism. Incrementalism is the worst term that anyone ever came up with because
Hmm.
it sounds like, oh, we have to sneak up on people. We can't just like
Yeah.
come right out with the things that we think are good. We have to sneak up on them.
It's like
And
slowly
immediately
poisoning
sounds
someone,
bad.
right?
Yeah, that sounds immediately bad. If someone's like, I have to do this, like,
It's a little bit of mercury every day.
exactly.
And I get
Who lives down the
sometimes
street from
why.
me? Sorry, there's a lady who lived down the street from me who, like, back in the 1930s, poisoned many of her husbands and lovers with a little bit of arsenic at a time, and
Mhm.
then told everyone that she was psychic and could predict their deaths. So it's like, look, just looked like they had been sick for a long time. But it doesn't it doesn't come off well, and people think it sounds like very responsible, and we're not like you radicals. We want things done subtly. We want incrementalism, and it basically sounds like you don't think that other people will like these policies, and if you act like people aren't going to like those policies, and if you act like people aren't going to, side with you on things, because why should they? Obviously, Republicans are so much more appealing. Then why the hell should they take your word for,
Yeah.
to vote for you or to support other things if you're acting like they're bad?
And that's also, it kind of reminds me sort of the nice guy trope, and knowing this
Hmm.
from my college days. So even sort of the obnoxious drunk frat guy, but if he comes up and was like, "Hey, you're hot, let's go out," it's all there, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, blah blah, blah,
you know
it's
what you're
okay.
getting.
This is what this is what he wants, and then the nice guys would always. And I've in those circles, especially in the arts, and these guys, it seems diabolical, right? They're like, hey, it's like, oh, I'm Robin's friend. It's like, oh, I'll go to this thing she's into,
Yeah,
and then I will
I'm
sort of,
above
and
that.
it's sort of subtly, it is like poisoning food though. Like, okay,
Mhm.
then it's like, then we're like friends, and then we're here, and then eventually, but it's all like, just seems so calculating and sinister, and it's just like, well, if
And
you
it
like
never
Robin, just
happens.
tell her, yeah.
It never happens. And like all women are just like, hey, if you say like, hey, let's go on a date, you can say yes or no, and then it's over with. And usually women will say yes because they want to go on dates. Like, and it's a lot easier that way as opposed like I mean, someone on the same topic, but not totally, is like I have had men that like I thought were my friends absolutely explode with crazy pants rage at me because they thought we were on dates. or we had gone on a date or something, and I still treated them like a friend because they said, "Hey, Robin, do you want to go to Rainbow or whatever bar that we all normally go to?" And I assumed, "Oh, we're friends. You didn't tell me it was a date." But then they scream at me later that like, "Oh, it was a date and you're like an evil, horrible bitch who deserves to die in a fire." Normal men stuff. And like if you are not direct with what you want and then just like simmer with rage because you're not getting it, then you turn into an asshole and it makes
No,
you bitter and weird.
no, absolutely. Um, yeah, so I think this is good that we're making progress. This level is very clear that abortion rights are popular. I would hope now that Democrats will stop talking about we don't need a litmus test on, I think, a
Yeah.
basic human right. And so stop supporting anti choice candidates. There's been cases where they have. And
Hmm.
when there's ever been pushback, some Democrats I've seen online will be like, well, we need to have this anti choice candidate. So that's how else can we win in parts of Texas or parts of whatever. And then, of course, what happens is that, I am sympathetic to when, Democrats will say it's unfair to say, why did we not uh, codify Roe when we had power in 2009?
Hmm.
Look, most of those Democrats were anti choice. Like, okay, well, let's not make that mistake again, because
No
then
more
it's just like
independence.
if you can't get enough, then it just implies, okay, well, maybe this isn't popular, right? Like if every Republican and some Democrats don't support something, the public would just view it. Let's say, just from an average person's perspective, you'd be like, I guess abortion rights is a fringe thing, right? Because no
Yeah.
Republicans support it, a couple maybe, but and a few Democrats, and they don't like talking about it, and they want to ring. So it's not popular. We can do whatever we want. And I think now we're seeing that that's not the case. Now you are going to lose elections if you're anti-choice. And of course, Republicans are dangerous. So what they're going to do is strike back hard, try to figure out ways to make sure they can't win, and they can kind of continue
Hmm.
their tyranny of the minority. Um, Somewhat related with the
Honestly, Democrats need a little like Democrats get all like, "Oh no, we're scared of populism. Populism is scary." They need a dose of populism. They need a dose of, I'm not a witch, I'm just like you. Like,
there are some
sorry, deep
there's some
cut, deep cut.
yeah, there are some Democrats online and a lot of folks who very strongly believe that populism. I don't know if this is both Trump and Sanders issues. And granted, there's a history, to be honest, but populism is inherently racist. It's inherently fighting kind of the elite and that sort of stuff. And you know, um, I'm of the mind that yes, Birth of a Nation is a racist film, but I think a moving camera is a good thing. So I'm not going
Yeah.
to abandon everything in that. Gone with the Wind, I don't kind of care for, but hey, those are some pretty dresses. I think pretty dresses in
They are.
movies are nice. So, like, I think sometimes it's a lot of
Though I
throwing
hate
baby with
Olivia
the
de
bathwater out.
Havilland.
Yes. So I think when you talk about populism, it's like, yes, like people respond to people who connect with them, to the point of where they,
Abortion is a populist topic, and I think that that is something that Democrats very much need to realize. That is, it is a populist topic. It is a thing that affects. It's not just like, oh, it just affects like fancy, educated people who know enough to know that abortion is good. No, it affects like literally every single human person with the capacity to get pregnant or get someone pregnant and have some amount of like care in anything. Like it is a human issue. And I think that sometimes Democrats get so head up about not being a particular thing that they decided is bad at the moment, that they completely sort of miss things that would actually be helpful to them. Like, oh, we've realized that, it's bad when Republicans say, or when people say economic anxiety, because that's code for people are actually racist. But also, people are economically anxious. They are. People are freaked out all the time. Like, that is a thing that is separate from racism.
Mhm.
Like, using it
When
as a code word for that isn't good, obviously,
when
but
you're rolling your eyes at that, it just seems really like you're sort of as a party dismissing that people have trouble making ends meet
yeah.
and perhaps are susceptible to people saying these are the people who are to blame and elitists. And so the answer is not that they don't have the problem. It's just like someone with cancer going to some kooky faith healer is not making up the cancer. It's just like, well, this is bad. Maybe that let's give that person health care so they're not at this point where they have to sort
Mhm.
of be desperate. And I think sometimes we can kind of be way too cynical, I think, in that
Yeah.
regard.
Or just like way too sort of like dismissive. And, I hate to say it, but like, I mean, shit is so cheesy. People like respond to righteous anger, they respond to joy, they respond to like human person emotions,
Oh
and they
yeah,
respond, and they respond to Schadenfreude. They respond very much less to, we are the adults in the room and we're responsible and you're stupid. That's not a thing that people respond to. No one
yeah.
likes it and it seems bad.
Well, it
Like,
just goes to the idea with abortion of almost abortion was closeted to the sense that arguably more like homosexuality was or is in some cases
mhm,
politically. So whereas I joke about even Democrats will be, I don't just support gun rights. Look at me shooting my gun in their campaign ad, and we would never
mhm.
see a woman running saying, or even a man like, oh yeah, I love abortion rights. My girlfriend got an abortion, or a woman's like, I got an abortion. It's
Well, I
very
mean, we
clear.
are getting more of that now, which is
But
like
as
awesome.
politicians, it was very rare. That was something like,
Oh yeah.
especially a decade ago or even 10 months ago, it would be seen like, oh my God, don't lead with that or don't mention it. Or if you talk about it as if it was some, like you'd gotten mugged
Safe,
or something.
legal, and rare.
Like it was some disaster that happened to you
Yeah.
personally rather than like, no, 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 here's what and here's how dare you, and sort of humanize that. I mean, it comes isn't starting now, as you say, but to really humanize it, to sort of make the folks who are trying to, because the anti-abortion side, they're trying to humanize. Republicans always do
Mhm.
this. They humanize the evil side. So it's like, oh, we're trying to protect babies, or we're trying to protect, um,
And they obviously don't give
children from.
a fuck about babies. Like, if they cared about babies, they'd want babies to have health care. They'd want like mothers to have health care. They would not want policies that made it so you know, babies with fatal fetal anomalies are uh, like being born and then spending an hour in agonizing pain before they die because they don't have a brain or they don't have lungs. Like, that's not I love babies. That's
Mhm.
punish the whores. And that is
Well,
very much,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's sort of a ghoulish thing, and I felt that was not we weren't hearing it enough, sort of to a point where it fell to a quote unquote doctor, not a doc, quote unquote, but Ralph
Mhm.
Northam, who had to sort of bungle the response to that about what happened, about making the child comfortable, which is true, but he's speaking in very technical terms.
Yeah,
But it wasn't like it should have been. Democrats should have brought forward more, arguably, would be willing to say
yeah.
this is what happened. It's not
I mean,
Trump is lying when he's blowing brains out, talking about doctors blowing kids' brains out, or if they, Republicans are still saying that women
oh yeah,
are literally
absolutely.
killing their children after birth, which is
Well,
insane.
because they
But
realize they can get away with making shit up. Also, have you ever had a doctor explain something well that was horrifying in some
no,
capacity? No, no. I'm personally terrified of surgeons and will never speak to one again. Live in fear of heart surgeons. Never, don't want to hear anything they have to say or have them explain rainbows or anything. Like, it will sound horrifying no matter what. Um, like, there's doctors are good at certain things, maybe not like explaining really horrific life situations. But
No, no. We once had a my wife was furious. We had this one doctor who was explaining our child's mobility challenges, cerebral palsy,
yeah,
and it was sort of like she was handing like a tissue, like presumptively assuming that we are going to weep and she's like, we're kind of like, well, we actually don't consider this, we really like this kid. It's not a tragedy. Like, how can we help him in his world or whatever? But like, it was if it was just like she was telling us someone had died, and that's
yeah,
not how we were taking it, and didn't want to work with someone who viewed it that way, because we
yeah.
don't and still don't. So but yes, they're not often known for their bedside manners. So speaking of medical issues, so the latest that we've been hearing about the senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, was that her daughter, I think, now has power of attorney over her. Her daughter, who's in her
Yeah,
60s, and that raised the question of like, what? But how could a sitting senator surrender power of attorney, and yet still, like, what is this at all? This just seems very bizarre, and we all kind of know her health challenges. I find that the lack of transparency, or often outright gaslighting about the problems, makes it is not a great thing for Democrats when they're running someone who's going to be 82 next year for president.
mhm,
It just should be like, hey, he could remain healthy, but we understand that he is mortal, and we understand that when things go in a tough situation, we will be upfront with you. We won't
yeah,
pretend something's not happening. Because I think also I think the people who are insistent that, oh well, don't worry, it's different for Feinstein. With Biden, if his health started to decrease, of course Kamala Harris would be elevated. And it's like, well, those are very different staff. So the same motivation to protect the people surrounding Feinstein, as opposed, and
yeah,
not allowing Barbara Lee or Katie Porter or Adam Schiff to get elevated too soon, or that sort of thing, would still be there to make sure that Harris is not elevated if it's Biden's here. And people, voters would want to know that this is actually what's happening, that that there's just transparency on it, but there just isn't. And this goes back to what you're saying somewhat about Democratic issues. So Christine Pelosi, who
mhm,
obviously has her motivations, Nancy Pelosi's daughter, was like, basically, well, she has to, we need those federal judges, so she has to still, which is just like, okay, well, Mitch McConnell rationalized some awful stuff for his particular agenda.
yeah,
Are you saying, so essentially your argument is that from a Democratic standpoint, we should have a senator who's perhaps not all there, but as long as someone, we don't know, because that person isn't giving interviews, like whoever her senior staff, that whoever that person is who's steering her towards voting the right way, that's appropriate because we're going to get these judges. I'm always of like, well, that just seems scuzzy. If your problem is that you believe Republicans, and that's what I've been told, won't allow a replacement for Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee if she were to resign, why not just fight that battle? And back to our friends Manchin and Sinema, slap them around publicly and say they're the ones who are allowing Republicans to do this horrible anti-democratic thing, and they still will just bend over for Republicans. So either they're
yeah,
just as bad as Republicans, or they're idiots. But this is ghoulish. Same with like the military
yeah.
promotions, right? Like no one, Tommy Tuberville is like holding up these military promotions. He's in the minority, and everyone's kind of like, well, how does this even work? How does he get to do this? Why isn't the guy in charge, theoretically, Schumer? Why has he shot this down? And like the argument is like, oh, he can't,
And
Mansion,
here's the thing,
cinema.
if Democrats did that, they would be absolutely demonized.
Oh yeah.
Like, it would be like, "Oh my god, you hate the troops." Which, like, I mean, how much did we have to sacrifice in the, 2000s because Democrats were so afraid that people were gonna think they hated the troops? Like, come the fuck on, we're owed something. Like,
Well, yeah.
take, because like I know a lot of them have, like, they want to have their like, oh, I know you hate the troops moment. So like, work that on out.
Well, yeah, and I discussed this as well because someone said, "Well, he's from Alabama; he can do whatever he want or whatever." And I was like, "Well, if this were Sanders or Warren, who were like, I'm going to hold up military promotions until whatever issue they wanted had been advanced, um, it wouldn't be about them. Republicans would would exert the pressure so that it's bad for, let's say, a Democrat in like Mark Kelly, who's up there,
Yeah.
or someone in a purplish state." And so the idea is like, okay, well, yeah, well, you should put the pressure should be not just on Tuberville, but on Republicans, even House members, to the point that he's marginalized and isolated.
Mhm.
But they have trouble doing that. It's similar with Clarence Thomas. There was more news released today about his billionaire buddies giving him more gifts and more gifts.
38 vacations. I know you're going to be excited about that. I'm trying to write a version of not getting married today, but about Clarence Thomas's 38 vacations and or B-52's 52 girls. Like there are a
A
lot
great song.
for
Um,
songs that we could write about Clarence Thomas's 38 vacations. And we should also be pressing that because how many Americans are getting 38 vacations ever in their life?
well, I don't know how Democrats have handled this has been baffling to me, especially because it's not as if he wants that known. He doesn't like. He has presented a persona of I'm a Walmart guy, blah blah blah. So
Oh
he
yeah.
clearly has present. So just hammer him on this repeatedly, and again put pressure on other Republicans and smaller districts or someone to just basically break. But right now, all Republicans can consolidate around him easily because Democrats kind of like Dick Durbin released something saying, John Roberts should do something. One, we don't know what John Roberts could do. John Roberts is barely in control of this court. He's mostly Alito. And like he can't do any, and we don't know if he could or if he wants to. And so the pressure should be on them. It's like embarrass him, humiliate him, come bring him forward.
I'm sure, like honestly, like I'm sure all the conservative judges are getting a ridiculous amount of kickbacks. Possibly not 38 vacations, but it would not surprise me.
I don't know. I don't know,
Maybe even
Robin.
Amy Coney Barrett's getting kickbacks at nunnery or whatever convent.
I tend
Going
to
on
think
convent vacation.
I tend to think,
That's
Robin,
a
that
thing. I think it's a thing.
maybe they want this more than we do. If you're willing to spend that much time with Clarence Thomas, that's quite a sacrifice. So maybe they deserve to run the world because they're willing to spend that much time with Clarence Thomas, who's just a terrible human being from all accounts. So it's just like they're willing to go all in. So I guess that's all we kind of have. We're almost at time, but do you you've written some abortion wrap ups recently, but most of the stuff has been good news overall in the sense of like stuff in Ohio, although there's still some crappy
Yeah,
stuff
it's largely
happening.
been like way more positive lately. Like Arizona's getting it on the ballot. I think just like a variety of states are just like, hey, you know what? If we put it on the ballot, they will come, and they do. And as horrible as everything is, we could possibly get to the point, I think, because I'm an optimist, where we get 26 states putting legal abortion into their state constitution, and then we might be able to get another way of getting it into the United States Constitution.
That's good
Like I
news.
think of
That's
every American, that's what they were trying to do with Square Dance. And on that note, I'm not going to myself, and we're going to check out. We will see you later. Bye.
Take care.